prepared a small presentation about our implementation of FHIR in the Danish setup, where we have a lot of the messaging. We have started in MedCom for many years ago and have been running some projects with messaging. And I have a short introduction slide just to have a fresh up of who MedCom is, because we started in 1994 as a public funded non-profit organization to facilitate the cooperation between authorities and private companies and organizations. So we are a publicly owned company in Denmark, owned by the Ministry of Health and the regions, 5 regions in Denmark, and the local government, who consists of 98 municipalities. But the tasks we have in MedCom is developing standards for interoperability and performing tests of these standards, and also have projects where we have pilot projects or dissemination of integrations nationwide. And besides that, we also have the responsibility for a backbone network in Denmark. But that was short about who we are, and now I'll try to tell you a little about the MedCom catalog of standards, because during the years we have a lot of different national standards. In fact, we have 194 different standards, and the major part of those are old and made in EDIFACT, but we also have some standards written in XML, and both the EDIFACT and XML are in the Danish language, and they are the EDIFACT is used for messaging, and the XML standards, we use that for both messaging and data sharing across the public Danish different systems. But we also have responsibility for some web services, and also for a little part of the classifications we use in Denmark. We hold the responsibility for a few classifications, and the rest is in the governance of the health authorities in Denmark. But around 8 years ago, we found out that this was not a good path to be running on these Danish standards. We needed some HL7 standards. So we have been, during 8 years, developing CDA documents for sharing in an XDS infrastructure. And the new thing that we have made during the last 3 years is changing from this EDIFACT messaging into FHIR messaging. What we realized when we should perform this modernization is that we modernize the message types, the message technology. So we have CDAs and FHIR from HL7, and all the old legacy standards, we will outphase them as fast as possible. It will take us some years, no doubt about that. We also need to modernize our infrastructure in Denmark. We still have our XDS infrastructure for sharing documents, but we are changing our old operated network for messaging with a new European e-delivery network. I don't know if you're aware of this e-delivery project, but we have been granted project money for this in Denmark, so we can start a rollout and implementation in Denmark, and get away from our old privately operated PANS network into a more open e-delivery network. And alongside these two infrastructures, we also have a new FHIR infrastructure, and that is has evolved in the local governments in the municipalities where they had projects for home monitoring and questionnaires in the telemedicine projects. So in Denmark, it was the municipalities who was the first movers on FHIR. There's a third leg in our modernization in MedCom, and that's concerning how we have a quality management system, and that has nothing to do with HL7, but it's just an important role for us or it's important for us as a standard organizations to improve our quality in how we operate. But what we realized that when we started to make MedCom standards was that we needed a Danish core profiles. And I think that's a strategy in most countries, that you have to have some core profiles, which is a common way of implementing in systems or in integrations. The way we have done it in Denmark is that the HL7 affiliate develops the core profiles. And that consists of 25 members. It's a small affiliate in Denmark. And it consists of members from the health authorities, also from the industry, and also a lot of independent consultants. So we have made some profiles like the patient resource, the organization resource, practitioner, and condition to medicine, the first ones we started with. But an important learning is that it's very important to make a national coordination of how you profile at a national level, but it is also important to have a sort of coordination about all the rest. What you have to make of extensions in different projects also need to be coordinated as much as possible. So that's one of our important learnings. In MedCom, we have a bunch of, or rather many standards, so we will make them as new ones now, and we will inherit from this DK core profiles. And together with the HL7 affiliate in Denmark, we try to involve all Danish FHIR projects into this process. All standards used in Denmark has to be approved by the health authorities. And in MedCom, we have been given a special role, and that is because the HL7 affiliate is not paid to make these DK core profiles. So they need someone to have a review of them to validate if they are fit to use, and also make the presentation in the health authorities and make this approval process run in a smooth way. So the affiliate have a special interest group only to make these DK core profiles, and we facilitate these meetings where we develop the DK core. So it means we are sort of secretary for the work. We make agendas, we make meeting minutes, and also a release plan for new versions of DK core. So we have three important tasks. The MedCom performs the review, but that includes that we ask all relevant stakeholders. So because in MedCom we know everybody in Denmark, we know all the organizations, we know all the vendors, we know all the medical associations. So we have a sort of a hearing where we hear all stakeholders. Here's a new version of the common national DK core. Is this acceptable, or is there a need for adjustments? So MedCom doesn't own the standard, but as a steward, we ensure the approval process of this national basic DK core. We have an extra task with a rather important task and that is that we have become a Spock. So whenever a vendor or an organization have question or difficulty about to understand the common DK FHIR profiles, who should you contact? Who could give answers to your questions? And it's very difficult for an HL7 affiliate to take this role. And we have been asked if we would do this job, and we have accepted. But the MedCom role in supporting the FHIR transformation, there's two important issues here. One of the important issues is that we have to deliver the infrastructure architecture. So we'll have to deliver a national infrastructure where you can do the messaging, or you can do your API exchange of data. And in that, it's very difficult to have a lot of old infrastructure and then you implement a new FHIR-based infrastructure as well. And the bridging is a very important issue here, because you can't change overnight. Some will run with the old infrastructure and some will use the new infrastructure, and they have to be linked together in a good way. We realized that this is in Denmark not a question about, or a choice about, should we leave the messaging paradigm and move everything to a data sharing paradigm. We believe that in some scenarios you still need the messaging paradigm, and in other scenarios it would be better for a data sharing. It could be document sharing, but it could also be a FHIR server with some RESTful APIs on it. And we also have the belief that in some scenarios you would both have the need for messaging as well as sharing them for secondary use or other purposes. A very important goal for us in MedCom is to describe the roadmap for the transition. How do we ensure that all the systems implement FHIR? It will never happen at the same year. Some systems will be first movers and some systems will be last movers. And we have to have everything working in this process. So we'll have a lot of old legacy standards for the next years ahead, and they have to coexist when we introduce or implement new FHIR standards. And we have identified that there will be a need for a mapping between FHIR and old Danish legacy standards. And this mapping is a bit more complicated than the traditional mappings we have seen. We have been told that it was a very good idea to reward first movers. Those who implement FHIR should be rewarded. And one of the benefits is that when you implement integrations where you send data, you are allowed to send FHIR messages, not being aware of all the receivers are supporting this FHIR messages. So it should be more easy for first movers to start messaging FHIR whenever they are ready. But on the other hand, we will have to help the last movers who have never seen a FHIR message before. And that's why we produce an open source converter to convert from FHIR to the old legacy standards. And one of the benefits would be that if we ensure a national mapping, we are sure it has the same quality and hopefully a high quality, and it's consistent instead of leaving it to all the different organizations or vendors to make their own mappings, because that will happen in differently ways.
Are you using FHIR mapping technique to manage the coexistence of legacy think and FHIR new messaging? And maybe it might be for the next conversation is the coexistence of CDA and FHIR-based infrastructure. There is a topic that is not only for Denmark, that is quite common and shared among different countries, but maybe it could be part of the discussion later.
Yes, we have not decided how the mapping should be made in the most optimal way, but I think the old Danish standards are so differently from the FHIR structure that we will have to make our own mapping instead of using the FHIR mapping normal facilities. I think it's more easy to make a mapping to HL7 version 2, for instance. So we have a special issue in Denmark, I think, to have this complicated mapping.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Maybe I see that also Niels would like just to ask a question or a remark.
Sure, it's about cost. What does it cost, and how much does the public authorities pay, and how much do private investors pay for getting an infrastructure and developing the FHIR sharing system?
Yes, that's one of our big obstacles in Denmark. We have found all the good arguments for the transition to FHIR, and everybody agrees. We have so many benefits from FHIR, but the one obstacle that has been postponed our project for a few years is the cost. And our findings, we had a consultancy company to analyze what is the pricing of this. And for some vendors, it's very easy because they have built their application profiled upon FHIR. But for some old systems, the support for FHIR messaging is rather more expensive than we expected. But there has been an analysis, what is the cost, and right now the government is making funding debates with the regions and municipalities. We have the funding, half of the funding is from the government, and that has been granted. So we hope that this in the next month that the other half of the funding is paid by the municipalities and the regions. But the cost of implementing FHIR instead of all the old Danish standards is more costly than we expected. There's a high introduction price. All the companies say they have to take their developers and send them to FHIR courses and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael. I see that maybe we have a last question from Stefan. He said, well, it's true that during a previous webinar where MedCom was also intervening, the fact that the standards used and the XML standards particularly used in Denmark was an obstacle for the adoption for cross-border, for the use of cross-border services. Is this just going to change with FHIR?
Yes, it will be much easier for Denmark to make a cross-border cooperation or to deliver or share data between member states, because the new profiling is based upon the FHIR profiling. So all the terminology and the structure of data will be similar in Denmark as in other countries.
Okay.
But of course there will be some extensions or need for differences, but they will be much smaller than in the cases today.